BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Good morning. The countryside comes to Westminster. The reason why farmers had travelled from all over the country is that the budget gave them a shock. They say the changes from 2026 means that any farm with assets worth more than £1 million would have to pay 20% inheritance tax. The government says that figure could rise to £3 million with allowances. But farmers remain convinced the budget changes put family farms under threat. And that was the message from NFU President Tom Bradshaw.
It's been nothing but a bad budget. The human impact of this policy is simply not acceptable. It's wrong.
Well, that was Tom Bradshaw, President of the National Farmers Union, and the day began with farmers gathering here at Church House just next to Westminster Abbey, where farmers were arranging to meet their MPs later in the day to explain to them exactly how this inheritance tax would affect their individual farm.
Dawn Gemmell from Huddersfield.
Why are you here?
I'm here because I feel utterly betrayed that promises were made before the election, and on budget day the whole situation changed.
Are you yourself a farmer owner, or are you a tenant farmer?
We're 50-50, we're tenant and we own. My husband died a couple of years ago and I farm in partnership with my son. It's roulette as to whether you live 7 years, and then the next generation, it's Russian roulette again with them as to whether they will live 7 years.
Jason Silk. We're just a small family farm based in Bramdean, just outside Winchester.
Can you explain to someone who might say, well, hang on a minute, any other business does have to pay this tax. Why should farmers be let off?
I think it just comes down to the fact that we just don't physically have the money there to be able to do that. If we sold up, then yes, you could realise that sort of money, but then it's gone. I've got young children, I'm working very hard for them.
Henry Graham, and we farm on a family farm outside Newbury, and I'm here to try and say why we are being taxed with the additional taxes. We don't sell, you go and you pass it on to the next generation. I'm currently the younger generation coming on, wanting to do more, and is actively discouraging growth of a family business.
So what's your situation with your father and your mother and the farm then?
So it's only my mother. My mother's the boss, so it's just me and her that work on the farm. We don't have any other help. We do as much as we can because we can't afford to pay additional help. We don't draw proper wages like most people would, and if we were to draw wages, it would make the farm go into negative equity. And so everything we do, all the hours we do, we plough back into the business.
And how do you make a profit on your farm then?
You have to try and do diversification, which we've been encouraged by previous governments to diversify and to change, and don't just stick 100% with farming. And now that's all the encouragement we've been asked by the government to do for our own financial stability is now going to be taxed from this.
Tom, we're standing in the chamber where you spoke. You actually got quite emotional when you were speaking about your family and this process of inheritance tax.
I think they've completely missed the human impact of this policy. And look, money's one thing, but people is something that I can't give up on. I don't believe that it's what the government meant to happen, but the longer they lock down, the more it feels vindictive rather than just a mistake. They have got to sit round the table with us and come forwards with a full consultation. I think Steve Reid is in a difficult position. With the fact
but he's not budging, is he?
And that is, for me, very, very difficult, because I now know that both him and the Food Security Minister, Daniel Zeichner, have real-life examples of the human element of this policy.
Outside of this chamber, it is chock-a-block all the way up Whitehall. What are you going to say to those farmers? What are they supposed to do next?
What comes next is down to the government. The ball is firmly in their court. We want to sit down with the Chancellor to have a considered conversation and to come up with a solution that answers their question, but that keeps our family farms intact for the future. If they're not willing to sit down around the table, I'm not sure I can control those people out there.
Is that a threat?
It's not a threat, but you've seen the action, the sense of mistrust, the sense of betrayal. The government have the solutions to this. They sit down around the table, we have a conversation, they come out with a statement. It's very easy.
One of the reasons why the Labour government decided to do this was to stop big money buying up acres of farmland so that they don't have to pay such a big tax bill. So was the intention right?
If they are trying to stop people that have made a significant amount of money outside of our industry, investing in land to pass intergenerational wealth, let's close that loophole. What they've done today does not disincentivize the really wealthy because they still get a 20% tax break.
What about people on the street, though, who say, look, I don't have £1 million, but I still have to pay inheritance tax, and I have to pay full inheritance tax. I'm not a farmer. I don't get this 20% that farmers are getting.
Well, if they don't have £1 million, then very few of them will end up paying inheritance tax. We know that only about 4% of society do end up paying inheritance tax. Look, we need to meet with the Chancellor. This is not going to be sorted with Steve Reed.
Have you organised a meeting with the Chancellor?
So far, the Chancellor's refused to meet.
Have you asked? How many times have you asked?
We asked before the budget and since the budget, and we've still not been offered a meeting.
Do you think the action taken by farmers here today might force the hand of the Chancellor to actually have a meeting with you?
I've tried not to force anybody's hand. We've tried to sort this out amicably. I've written a heartfelt letter to the Chancellor to try and help her understand the unintended consequences. My door's open, my phone's on. We'd love to have a call, we'd love to have a meeting, but the ball is firmly in the government's court.
While farmers were still on the street, inside, DEFRA Secretary Steve Reed was facing questions from fellow MPs at the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee. The chairman, Scottish Lib Dem Alistair Carmichael, asked Mr Reed if he thought farmers were wrong to say many more than 500 farms would be affected by the inheritance tax changes.
Assuming these projections from HMRC validated by the OBR and the IFS are correct, then many of them probably happily are wrong, because there are things that they can do to plan their tax affairs, as most businesses or asset owners would do, to limit their liability. I mean, the numbers I've heard bandied around are enormous and very, 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 very frightening if people were to believe them.
Based on DEFRA data, of course.
Huh?
Based on DEFRA data on the size of
It's
farm.
based on DEFRA data, which shows you the value of a farm, and then people have drawn a straight line to an inheritance tax liability, but you can't do that, because ownership is much more complex than one person, one farm. And when you take into account these other factors, as the Treasury has done, as the OBR has done, as the IFS have done, they all say that less than 500 would be affected a year.
Well, Steve Reed would have been well aware of the huge number of farmers gathered just near to Parliament earlier in the day. I've walked up now through Whitehall. I could hardly get through the crowds, I have to say. We've been walking for quite a long time, weaving our way, and as you can hear, they are angry, they are concerned, they're worried. Well, Clive Bailey, the influencer and organiser, I suppose, of this rally.
Farmers just don't know what to do. They're desperate. They needed this. They need that outlet.
And what about the knock-on then from this? How you reach out to ordinary people who are not farmers, who might be listening to this and saying, well, hang on a minute, I might have to pay inheritance tax. Farmers are getting a lower inheritance tax burden than anyone else. Yep. So why are they complaining?
Farmers aren't special. We're no more special than any other part of society or any other occupation. But our businesses are very different. And the difference of a farming business is there's embarrassingly low returns on the capital employed. We have huge amounts often tied up in the assets needed to farm. But we can't pay tax from them without selling them. And that's why most of these farms are going to end up having to be sold to pay these tax bills. And then who's going to buy them? Farming became uninvestable at that budget, didn't it? So no one's going to buy land to farm now. It's going to be bought by the institutional, the corporate investors that are interested in development opportunity, energy projects, biodiversity net gain, carbon offset, those kind of things. Huge buyers.
What happens after this?
I've got concerns about what happens next. I mean, I think what amazes me about today, and the huge numbers of people that are here today, I think it was the budget 10 days ago, I sent a WhatsApp message to 3 friends saying, okay guys, what are we doing? Because we're all in the same situation. We've all got those social media followings. We all had inboxes full of people saying, what, when, why, tell us, we'll do it, we'll be there. We thought we could organise something. We could see there was a need to do something to complement the NFU event at Church House. We had no idea it would be this big. So, in that short period of time, if that many people can make that commitment, so if they're willing to do that, is this just a warm-up act for bigger things?
Well, what bigger things, though?
Well, there's the more militant amongst the farming community. They've seen what happened in Europe. They've seen the kind of French farmers and German farmers. They saw the action they've taken, and they've seen it work. So, there are people that want to go that way. Now, I would rather things didn't come to that, but I know the strength of feeling amongst farmers is at that point there. I'd prefer we could just sit down with government, try and explain, make them understand and find a solution to the problem. They've got a black hole to fill, fine. Let's find a better solution.
I've joined some farmers here who have come down from the rally. Where have you come from?
I come from Lincolnshire today. Chris Barton.
Amber Barton.
People might look at farms and go, oh, well, they've got a lot of money, they've got loads of assets, they've got lots of building, they've got lots of land.
Well, we're not cash rich enough to be able to afford it. Basically what it means is that my wife we're expecting in February. It's very unlikely that we'll be able to pass on the farm that's been going through generations.
How do you feel about that?
I think for me, obviously being 8 months pregnant, the idea of bringing my son into this world and knowing that I'm going to land him with an absolutely enormous debt from the day he's born, that's terrifying, and not something that we expected 3-4 weeks ago.
Well, you've got 7 years to sort this out. It's not immediate, is it? I mean, farmers are standing around talking as if you're going to have to pay this out tomorrow, but you've got time to work it out, and you're younger people, aren't you?
It doesn't mean that people have got to die in the right order. There's nothing accounting for being run over, cancer, illness, all this sort of stuff. It's a massive risk. That's why it's a gift. And if you do that, then you're in a huge problem if you die within that time. So it's not really an answer, is it?
We've just been walking down and Helen Rebanks is here with your placard. Just turn your placard round.
I've made a collage of lots of things from our farm to just bring a bit of the countryside to Westminster. We've got our Herdwick sheep and our Belted Galloway cattle and our 4 children, and that's why I'm here today. It makes me feel quite emotional, the lack of understanding of what this budget has done, the lack of understanding and knowledge that we can restore nature across the British countryside, and we need farmers to do that in their thousands, and that the trust has now gone.
Your husband, James Rebanks, he's become someone that people listen to. Did you sit down with him after the budget? Have you as a family tried to work out what it means to you?
Oh, we certainly have. We watch the budget together, we talk about everything together, we run our farm as a team. I do all the paperwork for the farm. James is a minority of one, and with his mum and I as partners in the farm business, and our daughter is 17 and she's an apprentice. We have spoken to our accountant, we've looked at succession planning. We have 4 children. Our farm probably falls under the threshold with what it's worth, but it's the principle of what this budget means. This is why we're here today. Just try and keep British farmers going and support them as much as we possibly can.
And that's all from us here in London. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.